If you're not lifting like this, then you're probably missing out on the number one most important athletic trait. Yeah, it's great to have more muscle mass, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that you're getting any more athletic. We've all seen videos of bodybuilders trying to shoot hoops or do anything athletic like that. It's not really a pretty sight, right? Now, don't get me wrong, there's definitely a time and place to build muscle, aka hypertrophy, right? But just about all the information that you see online, it's about how to maximize that muscle growth, and it's not actually about how to become more athletic or how to live a longer, healthier life. What bodybuilders lack, and what the majority of information that you're going to see online doesn't tell you, is actually how to build power. So, power is really just your ability to produce a lot of force quickly. Think of sprinting fast, jumping high, dunking a basketball, things like that, right? Basically, any athletic movement that you can think of requires more power than it does muscle mass. They can be related. Getting more muscle mass can make you more powerful, but it doesn't necessarily have to unless you specifically train to achieve that trait, right? So I'm going to dive into exactly how to train for power here in a second. But first, I want to even talk about why it's so important in the first place. Power is so important because we actually lose power at a much faster rate than we do muscle mass. After the age of 40, we will lose about 3 to 5% of muscle mass per decade. We will lose about 10% of power per decade after 40 as well. What that means in the real world is that you'll have a harder time, climbing steep hills. You won't be able to keep up with your kids or your grandkids. You won't be able to keep playing sports like you want to, whether that's basketball, golf, pickleball even, right? You gotta have some power to be able to chase down that pickleball. You're gonna lose distance off the tee, all that stuff, right? Eventually, you're probably even gonna need help getting up out of a chair. Can this be completely stopped? Absolutely not, right? But that process can be drastically slowed down if we are serious about our training and building up our power as much as we can while we still can. So, how do we train to maximize your power? Number one thing that you got to do is stop lifting for 8 to 12 reps per set. You got to stop taking it to failure every single time. That 8 to 12 reps has been kind of classically the range that we hypothesized was where we could maximize muscle growth, and the majority of fitness plans and programs and all that, that's what people will generally prescribe is 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 10. And as physical therapists, we definitely fall into the guilty camp there a lot. However, we now know that you're going to get muscle growth no matter what rep range you choose to lift in, as long as you're pushing yourself to a sufficient level of fatigue. So we know 8 to 12's out. So what rep range should you be lifting in? We really want to be lifting between 3 to 6 reps if we're trying to build power. Now, inside that 3 to 6 reps, it's also super important that number one, you perform those reps as explosively as possible. And number two, you only do as many reps as you can maintain 100% effort. You've probably done box jumps before. You know that as you go through the set, your last couple reps usually are not nearly as explosive as those first couple reps, right? Very important that when you're training for power, you need to stop immediately as soon as you feel yourself start to lose that speed, start to be less explosive. It's actually much better to do 3 sets of 3 reps of super high quality, very explosive reps than it is to do 3 sets of 6 reps with kind of diminishing quality, right? As you get tired, as you start to lose that speed, and it just kind of drops down from there. It's much better if you would have just stopped at 3 sets of 3 reps instead of pushed through just because your program said 6 reps. If you do want to get more explosive and more powerful, you really need to have every single rep be at max speed and max effort. So obviously, if you're trying to move that fast and explosive, it's going to be pretty challenging to lift a lot of weight as you're doing that, right? So here's where we can kind of go 2 different directions when it comes to building your power. One way is that you can actually lift super heavy weights while simultaneously trying as hard as you can to move that as fast as you can. Now, when you have heavy weights, obviously that's going to be challenging to try to move that as fast as you can. But this is actually great for developing your total power output, right? So the total amount of power that you can put out, this is the best way to increase that number. The downside of that is that it's not actually going to help something called your rate of force development. So your rate of force development just means how fast that you can actually use that strength, that power, right? So are you able to turn it on really quick, or does it take you about a half second to get up to pushing as hard as you possibly can? Think of it like being able to push a truck that's broken down, versus needing it quick, something like a vertical jump where you're trying to go up and dunk a basketball. It doesn't really do you any good if it takes you half a second to get up to your max power output when you're trying to dunk. It does when you're trying to push a truck, but that's not really going to help you if you're trying to be athletic. So you can see lifting heavy weights has some benefits, right? More total power output, but it also has some drawbacks. That's where the other way that we can train power comes from. So that's lifting light weights as fast as possible. This is where you're going to want to be lifting less than 30% of your 1 rep max for that given exercise. This works well for something like barbell back squats. Let's say hypothetically your 1 rep max is 300 pounds. So 30% of that would be 90 pounds. So meaning you should have no more than 90 pounds in total on your back as you're trying to lift explosively as possible. Another great way to train similar to this is something called plyometrics. Think bounding, skipping, drop jumps, hopping, sprinting, things like that. Really anything that is like an athletic movement that you're trying to move as quickly as possible. A lot of times that is a plyometric. Nothing will really build your power and explosiveness better than plyometrics. The great thing about plyometrics is that they actually improve your rate of force development, which means that you'll actually be able to use that force fast enough to improve sports performance. Now, going back to lifting those heavy weights as fast as you can, where you're just increasing that total power output, but not how fast you can turn it on, that is actually useful for playing offensive or defensive line in football or other contact sports like that. So this isn't something that you should choose one or the other. We really want to do both, right? So in summary, what we want to do is really stop lifting between that 8 to 12 reps. You got to stop taking yourself to failure every set. We want to drop those reps down to about 3 to 6 reps per set and only going until you lose speed, right? We need as high quality reps as possible, as explosive as possible, stopping when you lose speed. And I would recommend that you spend about 2/3 of that time either doing those plyometrics or lifting lightweight 30% or less of your 1 rep max 2/3 of the time, the other 1/3 of your time lifting that heavy weight as fast as possible so that we can get both benefits of our power training.